Power-ups, one of the more controversial features within PvZ2, and the controversy stems from the idea that they make the game too easy. And that's mostly true because if you've ever seen a PvZ2 challenge video, they are always banned. But under one of my videos, commenter Edward Peter Lemming had a great idea. What if we dedicate an entire challenge to power-ups to see how many are needed to beat all of PvZ2? Now, how would we do this? I could just replay the first level over and over again, as it has infinite lawnmowers allowing me to farm infinite coins. But this isn't feasible, as it would take me literal months to have enough coins. So what I've done is taken out a tiny loan of 2,000 power-ups each, and by the end we'll know how many power-ups are used and how much it would cost. But before we begin, let me show you the rules of the challenge. Number 1, I can only use power-ups, meaning no plants and also no lawnmowers. If a zombie sneaks through to a lawnmower, it's okay, but the lawnmower just can't be strategically used as a damage source. Number 2, there are many levels with pre-placed plants, and the same thing goes for them as the lawnmowers. It's okay if they defeat zombies, but I can't strategically use them to lessen my power-up usage. And that's really it for the main rules. There are some mini level dependent factors, and I'll acknowledge those when we get to the specific levels. Oh, and quickly, about 8.2% of people who watch my videos are subscribed, so if you end up enjoying the video, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always unsubscribe. Okay, that's enough yapping. Let's begin the challenge. Day 1 rapidly starts with me zapping these first 2 zombies, completely missing my chance to zap the ones behind them. But thankfully, as I got about halfway through the map, another horde of zombies came in. So I waited just a little bit longer until they got very close to the lawnmowers and then popped a snowball power-up, completely taking out all the zombies that were currently on the map. But of course, this brought in more zombies. Then I thought I could wait for these to reach the end and maybe more zombies would pop out from the back, but my stalling tactic actually didn't work, so I ended up just using another zap power just for these 2 cone heads. And then as these were the final wave of zombies, I used of course the best power up, the snowball one, to take them all out, beating day 1 after using 4 of my power ups. Day 2 was an outlier of a level because if you look down at my power ups, you'll see that my 2,000 of each are gone. That's due to the reason that this level gives you free power ups to use infinitely. And at first I thought that this was going to mess everything up because my original plan was to just look at the number at the bottom right at the end and see how many power-ups I'd use. But of course with this level, they don't take out of my power-ups. But towards the end, I'd realized that I'd only used 6 power-ups on this level. So the quickest solution to this would just be adding 6 to my total at the end. And you guys don't have to worry about counting, as I'll be providing an updated count of the total power-ups used about every 10 levels, and then of course at the end of each world. But that aside, I beat day 3 using 2 zappy powers and 2 snowball powers, or so I thought, because several camo zombies were still off screen and actually survived the snowball power up. And this is actually something that happens pretty often because I think that all the zombies are out in the final wave, but then somehow 1 or 2 zombies survive, making me use a whole nother power up just for them. But that aside, day 3 was beat using 5 power ups. Day 4 is a conveyor level, but of course we don't use any of the plants and just stick to our power ups. And you'll notice in the early levels of each world that I heavily rely on the zappy power instead of course the better snowball one. And this was mainly due to the reason that I wanted to preserve my snowball power-ups for when I needed them for the tankier zombies. And as day 4 didn't really have any tanky zombies, I ended up using 5 of the zap powers and 1 snowball. But day 5, I should mention an elephant in the room, the flick power-up. The only time you'll see me using this one is when I'm trolling or I just get bored of using the other 2. And the reason for that is the flick power-up just sucks compared to the other 2. Well, that's actually a little unfair because flick can actually be pretty good if you're playing on a handheld device. As I'm playing on PC with the mouse, it's actually nearly impossible to use. But if you're a flick enjoyer, don't worry, I do use it in a couple instances. Day 6 was another conveyor level, and I realized that I was using a lot more power-ups than I initially thought. Originally, I was thinking 3 to 4 power-ups a level max, but the average was actually somewhere closer to 6-7. I apologize and I promise I won't say that again. Day 7, the first power-up I chose to use was a snowball one, taking out the zombies and some gravestones with it. And then as some sandstorms rolled in, I used a zappy power to take out all the zombies that were on the screen. And the next group was mostly defeated using a snowball launcher, while the one behind it was slowed down with the snowballs as well, after using a zappy power to take all of them out. And then another zappy power was put into play to take out this huge camel, which at last sent in the final wave of the level. and this time I waited for the entire camel to come out. And once I'd confirmed that all the zombies were on screen, I launched a snowball attack on all of them, just missing the perfect finish by one camel, who I then used a zappy power on. Finally beating day 7, having used 40 power-ups in total. Day 8, of course, I quickly shoveled all the plants that were on screen. Next, zapping these 2 explorers and then also getting another zombie that was coming in. Day 8 consisted mostly of me just using zappy powers to take out the minimal zombies that were being sent. And then of course, on the final wave, I used the snowball power. Day 9, although I already knew the flick was going to be useless, I still wanted to give it a chance. So I'd used it to take out these first 2 zombies that had been sent in the level, right after going back to the zappy and snowball power-ups. And the final wave of day 9 actually sent in a decent amount of zombies, and I thought that I might need to use 2 power-ups to take them all out, but one snowball power was actually able to take out all the zombies. Day 10 started with 3 zappy powers that were able to take out the small hordes of zombies that were being sent. And then for the semi-bigger group, I chose to use a snowball power-up, later using a zappy to get the zombies that I'd missed. And although this final wave didn't send in too many zombies, I still chose to use a snowball power just to be safe. And by the end of day 10, we had already used 59 power-ups. And 59 might sound like a lot, but this is about to get much worse, because on day 11, we're introduced to a second flag, which basically means a lot more zombies. And of course, we have yet to see the 3rd and 4th flags. The first couple of power-ups on day 11 were the zappies, and then as a bigger horde of zombies came in, I chose to use the snowballs, missing these 2 cone heads, so I had to use another zappy power just to take care of them. Next, using a snowball power to take out these zombies on the screen, but then a buckethead and raw zombie also came in, and I luckily got them as well. And thankfully, the final wave only sent in 4 zombies. And even though there was a buckethead, the zappy power was more than enough to take all of these out, finally taking down day 11. Day 12 didn't show us how many big waves there were, but this usually means that there's only one, which of course is good for us. And a couple power-ups took out the first few mini waves of zombies, but then day 12 also threw at us the coffin zombie, who actually got instantly eviscerated by the snowballs, so it isn't much of a big deal either. We just have to make sure that we're using the snowball power on it whenever it appears. I was also able to take down most of this big group with just one snowball power, then taking out this mini wave with the zappy power, which in return sent in the final wave, which in numbers was pretty underwhelming, but since there was a coffin zombie, we had to resort to using the snowball power. And using that, we of course took out all the zombies very easily. Day 13 only had 1 flag and also 2 mold colony columns in the very back. The 1 flag was of course good, and the mold colonies don't affect us at all since we're just using power-ups. And we used a total of 4 power-ups to reach the final wave. And then the final wave sent in 1 too many zombies, so 1 snowball power wasn't able to take them all out. So I had to resort to 1 more zappy just to take out these last 2 camels. Day 14, we went back up to 2 flags, which meant more zombies once again. And you might have noticed that I'm not really being frugal with my power-ups. And this is mainly due to the reason of how zombies are sent in Plants vs. Zombies 2. You have to deal a certain amount of damage for the next wave of zombies to be sent in. Of course, normally you do have the option of stalling using like wall plants or other stalling plants like the iceberg lettuce, but since I can't stall at all, it doesn't really make sense for me to wait for the zombies, because waiting for the zombies would just lead to them reaching the lawnmowers. So the only real strategy I can really implement is choosing what power-up I should use for which group of zombies, as well as waiting for the final wave to completely come out before I start using any power-up. And I'll explain more on that first strategy in the next level, as day 14 had now been beat. Day 15 again had amped things up a bit, with now having 3 flags, which meant even more zombies and more power-ups being used. And some of you might be thinking, why aren't I just using the snowball power-up since it's much better than both the flick and the zappy? And that was actually going to be my original strategy, but I had realized that there's 2 main problems to this. One being that we'd almost used 100 power-ups and we're only on day 15 of the easiest world. So I was actually scared that I might end up using all my snowball power-ups before I even reached Big Wave Beach or Modern Day. So I tried to use the zappy when plausible. And the second problem was that the zappy is actually much cheaper than the snowball power-up. And if I want to reduce the technical end cost of this entire challenge, it would be smarter for me to use the zappy on the weaker zombies. But strategy aside, we had now beaten day 15 using 91 power-ups in total. Day 16, we thankfully went back down to 2 flags, using 2 zappies and a snowball power to take out the first big wave. And then then 2 more zappies alongside another snowball power-up to take out the final big wave, totaling to 6 power-ups in this one level. Day 17 was even better for us because there was only one big wave. And another plus was that this level had the challenge where we could only have 14 plants planted, but since we're not using any plants, this challenge becomes meaningless. But another thing about this level was that it showed us that the amount of flags isn't a determinant of what decides how many power-ups we end up using, because we actually ended up having to use 7 power-ups in total to beat this level compared to the 6 from the last level that had 2 flags. Day 18 was pretty sad, but not because it was difficult, but because we couldn't prepare any defenses. But these levels are actually pretty cool because they send a lot of zombies at once, giving us some pretty satisfying power-up uses. And since the horde of zombies were pretty big, we're pretty reliant on the snowball power-up this time. And even the snowball power wasn't enough every time to take out all the zombies that were on the map. But eventually, after using 7 snowballs and 1 zappy, we had finally beaten day 18. Day 19 had 1 flag, 2 mold colony columns, and a 16 plant limit. Again, challenges that don't really affect us. And this time, we actually beat the level using 6 power-ups in total. Day 20, we went back up to 2 flags, and we had to protect these 4 sunflowers. And of course, in normal gameplay, the sunflowers are good for us, but since the sun doesn't help us at all, the sunflowers are meaningless. And even the challenge itself is meaningless because the zombies don't really ever make it that far. The only zombie we'd have to worry about is the explorer, but since the explorer's torch gets put out by the snowballs, they aren't very much of a threat. And now, day 20 had been beat, totaling to 124 power-ups used. Day 21 only had 1 flag, and the first couple of zombies were beat using 2 zappy power-ups, but then we had to bring out the snowball power-up for this coffin and bucket head, right after using a zappy for this small clump of zombies. And lastly, the final wave brought in another coffin, so I used another snowball power to take out all the zombies. 22 had 2 flags, 1 mold colony column, and an 18 plant limit. And I saw these very 2 easy zombies on the screen, so I chose to use the flick power-up to beat them, barely beating the pharaoh as I almost missed it. Once again teaching me that the flick power-up is a very risky one to use. And this time, the final wave was a little spread out because of the sandstorms, so I first chose to use a zappy power right after using a snowball to clean up the rest of the zombies. But even then, I missed these 2 camels, so I had to use 1 more zappy to beat them. Day 23 had 2 flags and consisted mainly of zappy power-ups until the final wave, which brought in our very first gargantuar, which very surprisingly got eviscerated by the snowball power-up before it could even throw its imp. But then of course I skill issued and missed the final zombie, having to use a second power-up. Day 24 again is supposed to be a prepare your defenses level, but of course we couldn't do that. And this level brought in a mix of a clump of very weak zombies and then at times a very small amount of very tanky zombies. And I was using the power-ups accordingly to which fit best. And I did actually lose a lawnmower on this level, but since I didn't really use it to strategize and it was only 1 zombie, it was okay. And in normal challenges, this would be the last level we play. But another cool thing about allowing only power-ups is that we actually get to play the boss of every world. And even though it is pretty cool that we get to play the boss, there isn't very much strategy to it as we literally just snowball spam. And the ancient Egypt boss is the easiest of them all, and it took 7 snowball power-ups to take out the entirety of his health. These bosses actually get much tankier later on. And that was all of ancient Egypt beat with a total of 163 power-ups. Next up, Day 1 of Pirate Seas for some reason starts with me collecting sun that I can't use, a truly unbreakable habit. But on the brighter side, the level only had 1 flag and a bunch of the basic zombies of the world that I could just use the zappy powers on for now. But of course, for the final wave, we brought out a snowball power, beating day 1 with the use of only 6 power-ups. Day 2, again, only 1 flag, but there's also another mini strategy that I started using when using the power-ups, and that was waving the power in the front of the map just so I could catch a couple more zombies that were coming in. Like for example, right here, I zapped the seagull zombie, but then waved the power in the front and ended up catching 2 more zombies that were coming in. And the rest of day 2 was beat using a snowball, zappy, and another snowball for the final wave. Day 3, once more, 1 flag, and this level was beat using 5 zappies and 1 snowball for the final wave. Day 4 picked up the difficulty, now having 2 flags. If you remember in ancient Egypt, the first 2 flag level was day 10. So as we progressed in each world, world, this gets worse and worse. And another difficulty factor of day 4 was that it introduced the bucket heads, almost guaranteeing that I had to use a snowball for the final waves and any other waves that had the bucket heads or tankier zombies. And then I made a big oopsie. I accidentally ended up playing day 4 for a second time without realizing, in which I ended up using 8 power-ups. But this isn't too big of a deal because it just means that we have to subtract 8 from the final count. But I thought I should mention it just in case some people are using the power-ups in the bottom right to keep track of the count, because this definitely would have confused things. But that aside, day 5 also had 2 flags, and I started off with a zappy power and then 3 more zappy powers until we reached the first big wave, in which I used the snowball power-up solely due to the reason that there was a bucket head. And after beating that wave, I used 2 more zappy powers, a snowball power, and then 1 more zappy until we reached the final wave, which had a couple more of the bucket heads, so I had to use the snowball power-up, and thankfully I took all the zombies out with just 1. Day 6, again, 2 flags, and I took out the first couple of zombies using a zappy, and then a couple more zappies to take out some more basic zombies that came in. And right after, I used a snowball power because I was unsure if the 2 cone heads would be dealt with by the zappy, which then sent in the final wave, and I used another snowball power to get rid of most of it, going back to the zappy for more of the lingering zombies that I'd missed. And one of the more annoying zombies of this world are the pirate swinging ones, since they jump in almost halfway through the map, which makes it so the snowball is kind of hard to get all the zombies with. So I was forced to use another zappy just for 2 more zombies. Day 7 started off with a bunch of basic zombies that I zapped away, but then a barrel roller zombie was sent in. But the zappy and snowball would make the imps fly out, so I ended up actually using the flick power up to get rid of it this time. But then as some bigger hordes came in, I went back to using the snowball and zappy powers. And for the final wave, I chose to use the zappy power, which actually led to the barrels surviving and the imps popping out. So for them, I had to use another snowball power, beating day 7. Day 8 was the conveyor level with 1 flag, and I started off by torching some zombies with the zappy, and then about halfway through converting to the snowball power. Then as the wave was going on, I kept using the powers that seemed applicable in the moment, but then the final wave sent in 2 gargantuars of the pirate seas, for which I ended up using the snowball power up for. And the first gargantuar I completely eviscerated, but the second one I didn't realize that I didn't fully defeat, so I actually launched this imp and I had to use a zappy to get rid of them. Day 9, we went back up to 2 flags and some tankier zombies throughout the levels, so I was having to use more snowball power-ups than the zappy ones. And I kind of messed up in the final wave because I thought the zappy would be enough for all the zombies sent, but it wasn't, so I had to use a second zappy just for these 2 zombies at the end. Day 10, things ramped up even more, with now the level having 3 flags. And for the first couple of zombies, I ended up using the zappy power and then converting to the snowball power later on. But then another annoyance of the pirate seas was introduced, which was the imp cannons that sit in the very back. But if you're able to take these out before they launch any imps, they aren't much of a problem. Their true problem comes in when they launch the imps before you take them out. So now you have to take care of the imp and the cannon, and these could easily make me waste more power-ups if I'm not carefully taking them out. But with that aside, we had now beaten day 10 of Pirate Seas, and the total power-up usage had gone to 246. Day 11, we'd gone back down to 2 flags, and it took us 5 total power-ups to reach and beat the first big wave, and then taking me another 5 to reach and beat the final big wave as well, totaling to 10 power-ups used in just this one level. Day 12 of Pirate Seas is actually a pretty special level, and that's due to the reason that it's one of the 5 levels that we actually can't play since it doesn't allow power-ups. So we move on to the next level. And day 13 is a special level as well because it's our very first sun production level. And in normal challenges, we'd skip these levels since we have to use sunflowers, but I wanted to get as close to the total amount of power-ups as possible, and I didn't want to skip any levels that allowed the use of power-ups. So for the sun production levels, I'll be allowing the use of sunflowers to reach the sun goal, but then of course only using power-ups to beat the zombies. And this makes it so we still get an accurate representation of how many power-ups we have to use to beat almost all of PvZ2. Because like the previous coconut cannon level, there are only 4 more levels that we have to skip over, and they all come into play in modern day. So for the next 8 worlds, there will be no skip days. Day 14 is originally a prep your defenses level, and it only has 1 flag with huge hordes of zombies, so we mainly end up using just the snowball power. And in total this level, I used 7 snowball power-ups and 0 of the zappy or the flick. Day 15, I first quickly shoveled the 3-peater, and we also had to protect these flowers in the back from being trampled on. And thankfully, it was still only 2 flags and not 3 or 4, so there weren't too many zombies to worry about. And of course, as the imp cannons would come in, I'd instantly zap them and take them out so the imps wouldn't get launched. And of course, as the final wave came in, I chose to use the snowball power up to take out all the zombies in one go. Day 16 is actually a pretty interesting one because we have to protect these two spring beans in the middle. And this leads to us having to constantly use our power ups because the distance between the spring bean and the start of the map isn't too big. So if I happen to give the zombies any room to work with, I'd lose because they take the spring bean out. And for style points, I used the flick power up to take out this last barrel roller zombie. Day 17 had 2 flags and we had to beat a certain amount of zombies under a certain amount of time. And I had a pretty cool idea of trying to flick the zombie into the water, which actually worked perfectly. So I might be using this power up a little more in Pirate Seas than I thought, but that's a big maybe, because as for the rest of the level, I mainly went back to using Zappy and Snowball power ups. And in the final wave, I surprisingly took out all these zombies just with one Snowball power up. I think I was getting better at using it. Day 18 had 2 flags, and again, I used the flick power up to start off the level to beat these 2 zombies, and then went back to Zappies and Snowballs. And the final wave could have been dangerous with the 3 imp cannons, but I got them down pretty easy, and I was able to defeat all the zombies just with one Snowball power up. Day 19 again was a level where we had to collect sun and also protect these flowers in the middle from being trampled on. And the collect sun goal was very minimal, and the flowers were also placed pretty far back, so these 2 challenges weren't too difficult. The only lane we'd have to worry about would be that middle lane in case one of the swinging pirates came in and got too close to the flowers. So I was using power-ups right away when I noticed them come in. And in doing so, day 19 was beaten pretty easily. Day 20 again was a collecting sun level, and this time it was even lower at 1000. And even better was the fact that this level only had 1 flag. And so we got through this level pretty quickly, and now day 20 had been beat and the total power-up usage was 320 power-ups. Day 21 was a combo of challenges as we had to collect 2500 sun and also defeat a certain amount of zombies under a certain amount of time. But the good thing was there was only 1 flag. And for this level, I was using mostly the Zappy power-up as there weren't many tanky zombies being sent in. And as the final wave came in, there was a bucket head, so I chose to use the snowball just for this horde. Day 22 is always an interesting one, but this time it was a little different as our main goal was try and not let the imp cannons launch the imps, so we had to use our power-ups whenever we saw them come in and take them out right away. But there was just so many imp cannons that we were just constantly having to use a power-up without any break. But at the same time, we also had to account for the pirates that were almost making it to the lawnmowers. And in doing this, we ended up using 9 power-ups in total to beat day 22. Day 23, again, we had to defeat a certain amount of zombies in a certain amount of time and also had to protect these flowers in the middle from being trampled on. And once again, there was only 1 flag. The game was being pretty generous with these, so we actually ended up beating this level using only 7 power-ups. Day 24 was the second to last level, and I started off by trolling the zombie with the flick and then going back to the regular power-ups as more zombies started coming in. And with several more snowball power-ups, the entirety of day 24 was beat. And now we're on to the boss of the Pirate Seas. And of course, the main strategy is still just snowball spamming them. And I did test out how much the Zappy power was going to do, and it did a decent amount, but it was still less than the snowball power. And in total, I ended up using 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and finally 13 power-ups to beat the entirety of the Pirate Seas boss. And with that, the power-up total had now reached 367. Another cool thing was that our Zappy and Snowball power-up were now at the same number once again. But that aside, next up, Day 1 of the Wild West, of course, only had 1 flag and the most basic of zombies, and it was beaten using 6 power-ups in total. Day 10 was mostly the same with 1 flag, but I had already brought in bucket heads, so I was having to use the snowball powers much earlier on. But even with this addition, this level was also beat only using 6 power-ups in total. Honestly, a pretty good start. 3 also started off very similarly with 1 flag and basic zombies, but then it also introduced the piano zombies of the world, which again, I had to use the snowball power for. And for the 3rd time in a row, we beaten the level with just 6 power-ups. Day 4 was a pretty interesting level because it's one of the ones where they give you a plant each wave, but thankfully they still allow you to use your power-ups, so all I did was plant my plant and then I shoveled it right away before it got any damage off. And then I'll just use the Zappy or the snowball to beat the rest of the zombies. But even though each wave was only taking 1 power-up in total, this level in itself had 10 waves in total, which meant I was basically forced to use 10 power power-ups to beat the entirety of this level, breaking our streak of the 6 power-ups. Day 5, we'd gone up to 2 flags, and all the early zombies were being defeated using the Zappy power-up, and then as some tankier zombies came in, I switched to the snowballs. A mini cool thing about the snowballs is that they defuse the dynamite that the dynamite zombie carries, which makes it so that it can't jump over anymore. Day 6 is originally a prep your defenses level, and as we've seen with all of these, they've only had 1 flag, but a ton of strong zombies, so we always end up having to use the snowball power-up to take these guys out. And I almost beat this entire level with only 6 power-ups used, but I missed these 2 zombies at the end, so I had to use a 7th Zappy power to take them out. Day 7 had 2 flags, and I was getting bored of using the other 2 power-ups, so I used the flick just to switch things up a little bit. But of course, as it's inefficient, I went back to the better one. And the Wild West is actually a pretty tricky one because of the zombies in the middle and the bottom middle lane, because you never know if they're going to be an easy zombie or the ones with the metal plates that are tanky. So it's always a safer option just to go with the snowball power-up to take them out. So every time I'd see these guys, I'd mainly just use the snowball power-up to be safe, because if they ended up being tanky ones, the Zappy power would just go to waste. Day 8 is a conveyor level with 2 flags, and I mainly started off by using the Zappy powers, but as a Buckethead came in, I switched to the snowball power, and then as Bucketheads were consistently coming in, we're basically only using the snowball powers for this level. But besides the Buckethead, there was another tanky zombie, the Gargantuar, which absolutely got obliterated before it even made it onto the map. And then within the final wave, I actually missed this Gargantuar and another imp, so I used the Zappy power to take care of them. Day 9 is supposed to be a level where the game picks your plants for you, but that doesn't really affect us, and all we have to worry about is the 2 flags. And right here you can see what I mean by the Zappy power goes to waste, because that one tanky zombie in the middle survived because I was using the Zappy power. So I had to use another one just to beat it, and thankfully some other zombies that had come in as well. And learning from this, I used a snowball for the final wave and took out all the zombies with 1 power up. Day 10 was pretty interesting because it started off with the basic zombie and only 1 flag, but then it threw in the chicken wrangler zombie, who of course we had to use the Zappy power for, because the snowballs can be good, but if you miss, the chickens will most likely make it to the end. And you're gonna notice me start to spam a lot more Zappy powers just to deal with these chickens, as they are actually kind of a threat to us. And so this level was basically beat only using the Zappy power. Day 11 only had 1 flag and also a 500 sun limit. And of course, we aren't using any sun, so that isn't much of a problem. And once again, I only used Zappy powers for the entirety of this level, and pretty surprisingly, I only had to use 6 in total. And after day 11, we had now reached a total of 460 power-ups used. In day 12, we went back to the level where it gives you 1 plant per wave, where we have to shovel them right away and then use our power-ups. And I was mainly sticking to the Zappy power, of course, but then a level brought in a Buckethead, so I switched over to the snowball power-up. And it's actually safe for me to use the snowball power-up because this level shows you what zombies it's about to send, and a chicken wrangler wasn't one of them. And the final level had a lot of tanky zombies, so of course I had to use 1 more snowball power, and this level actually forced me to use 10 power-ups in total as well. Day 13, we went back to normal and 2 flags. Again, just spamming the Zappy power whenever I could. And this level actually introduced the mechanical bull zombie, who normally I'd use the snowball power for, but since it was alone, I actually ended up just using a Zappy for it. And as the final wave had way too many zombies for a Zappy to handle, I used a snowball power up, but I actually missed one of the dynamite zombies, so I had to use a Zappy to take care of it. Day 14, once again, was a pretty normal level with only 2 flags, but this time there were chicken wranglers. And you can see here that the snowball power up can deal with the chickens, but it's a little scary because I have to be semi-accurate with them. So I had to use a Zappy power right there as one of the chickens almost made it to the end. So next time I straight up just used the Zappy power from the start. But for the final wave, we had to do a bit of a combination because there's too many zombies. So first I used the snowball power up and then quickly changed to the Zappy when the chickens started running out. But because of the chickens, this was the first final wave that I had to use 3 power-ups on. Day 15 had 1 flag, and the normal challenge was that we couldn't lose more than 2 plants. And this level doesn't actually have any chickens, but I was still mainly only using the Zappy power. And that's because there's now a second reason that was important that I only use the Zappy powers when applicable. And the reason was that we're only on the easy worlds and we'd already used so many power-ups. So I was genuinely scared that I might run out of snowball powers. Day 16, we had to protect this walnut, and the very first thing I did was move it to the very bottom lane because that made it to where it was the closest to the power-ups, just in case it got in danger. That meant that I could quickly choose the power-up and then quickly kill the zombie that was eating the walnut. But this wasn't something that I really had to deal with at all, as there weren't any chicken zombies, and all the other zombies I was able to take care of before they even got past the first 2 to 3 lanes. Day 17, we had to protect protect these flowers in the very middle of the map. And this time the level had 2 flags. And truthfully, my only worry was the chicken zombies, so I was trying to zap as fast as I could. And halfway through, a bull was sent, which I was able to defeat pretty easily, and it was starting to look like there weren't any chickens on this level. So for the first big wave, I chose to use a snowball power-up. And then, as I'd basically confirmed there were no chickens, I was starting to use the snowball power-up a little more, just so I didn't end up wasting any of the zappy powers either. Day 18 is normally a prep your defenses level, and it starts off strong by sending in a couple of chicken wranglers, who of course I zapped, but then I ended up zapping a couple of the chicken wranglers that were coming in from the back, so I had to use another zap quickly to get the chickens before they reached the lawnmowers. But these chickens felt non-stop, as I'd get rid of some of them, but then more would come out right after, so I was having to constantly just zap over and over again. This level literally gave me no room to breathe, as I'd literally lose if I let go of any of the power-ups. But even though it was annoying, it was also satisfying at the same time seeing all the zombies get eviscerated. And we ended up using 12 power-ups on this one level. Day 19 had a 2000 sun limit, and also the fact that we couldn't lose more than 2 plants. Both extremely useless challenges in the face of power-ups. And this time we used a total of 11 zappy power-ups to beat this entire level. Day 20 was once again one of the levels that has the mini waves where we plant and shovel the plant right away. And for the first 5 waves, we used the zappy power as it was all we needed. And then the 6th one brought in a bucket head, so I switched over to the snowball. And on the 10th wave, they threw a chicken wrangler at us, so I first had to use the zappy power to get rid of it, and then a snowball to get rid of the more tankier ones. And this led to me using 11 power-ups. Day 21 again had 2 more challenges, with us having to protect the flowers from being trampled on, and also a 1750 sun limit. And this entire level was basically beat with zappy powers until, of course, the final wave came in with some tanky zombies, so I resorted to using the snowball power once more. And now our power-up total had reached 559. Day 22, only 2 flags. And something I noticed about the Wild West is that most of the levels either only had 2 or 1 flags. I believe there's only 1 level with 3 flags and then 0 with 4 flags, which was pretty cool for this challenge. But the amount of flags get much worse very soon as we enter the next worlds. Day 23 was a pretty scary one, as it had 2 flags, and we also had to protect these flowers in the middle. And the main thing making it scary was the chickens that almost got there, and I had to quickly use a zappy to get rid of them. And then as we started approaching the final wave, more and more chicken zombies were being sent, so I was having to constantly use the zappy to beat them. This level felt even worse than that one prepare your defenses one, as we basically had 3 less columns to work with. But even with the few close calls, in the end I was able to beat day 23 on my first attempt. Day 24, we had to protect these 3 walnuts on these minecarts, and the very first thing I did was move them all to the middle lane. And this just makes it easier for me to see which zombies are a threat to the walnuts. This level also had chickens, so I was mainly just using the zappy power as well. And as the final wave was sent in, I first used the snowball power and then a zappy power to take care of the lingering chickens. And now we're on to the boss of the Wild West. And in total, it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and finally 11 total power-ups to beat the boss of the Wild West, making our total power-ups used 609. Next up, Frostbite Caves was probably the most unique world of them all, and that's because it's the only world that has the fire power-up. And this fire power-up just so happens to be almost better than all the power-ups in every aspect. There is one thing that the zap and the snowballs are better at, but I'll mention that later on, because for now, the fire power was destroying all the zombies thrown at it. And you'll notice throughout this entire world, the only power-up I'll be using is basically the fire one, and that's because we have 2,000 of it, and this is the only world that we're allowed to use it in. And this allows me to save my zappy and my snowballs for the later worlds. Day 2 in particular only had 1 flag and 6 frozen plants, and was beat using a total of 6 fire powers. But you could see that the worlds were picking things up on day 3 because it already had 2 flags. But the good thing about the fire power was it doesn't really care for the tankier bucket heads and is able to torch them at the same pace as any other zombie. And the final wave of day 3 sent in a ton of zombies, and normally the snowball or the zappy wouldn't be able to take these out in one power up, but the flame one on the other hand was easily able to deal with them with just half the timer. Day 4 again was a normal level with 2 flags, and it took a total of 4 fire powers to beat the first big wave. And identically to the first big wave, the final wave also took 4 fire powers to reach and beat. Day 5 was a conveyor level with 2 flags, 3 frozen bok choy, and 5 frozen cabbage bolts. And the damage on the fire power was so so good that we'd be able to take out the snowstorm zombies before they got too far. But I did notice one thing though, the snowball thrower zombies took a little more damage to beat with the firepower than the other ones. I don't really know the reason for this because I'm pretty sure that they aren't tankier than the bucket heads, and it might just be that they take less damage from fires. But with that aside, the final wave was once again torched with just 1 power. Day 6, again, only 2 flags, and the first big wave was beaten within 3 powers. And the final wave followed, in which I thought was going to take 3 powers as well, but right after I torched all these guys, 3 more snowball throwers were sent. So I actually ended up having to use 1 more power for these ones. Day 7, once again, had 2 flags and some frozen plants alongside some frozen Yeti imps. And the frozen plants I shoveled right after I broke them out of the ice. And nothing new was introduced in this level and was beat within 7 powers. Day 8 was a conveyor with 2 flags, and the main thing this level was a lot of snowstorms. So I'd wait for them to come in, and then once they'd all come in, I would start using the power up on them and instantly burning them all. It's pretty satisfying powering through all these zombies. And you can see that snowball thrower in the bottom left somehow survived the fire. And to take it out, I waited for the final wave to fully come in, and so I torched it before it reached the lawnmower, and then taking out the rest of the level as well. Next up was day 9, which already brought in the 3rd flag. And then it also introduced the Dodo Mech zombies, which actually aren't too big of a problem and are easily defeated. And even though this level did have 3 flags, we somehow still beat it using only 7 power-ups. Day 10 only had 2 flags and was a conveyor level. It sent in some minimal snowstorms, which weren't too big of a deal. Realistically, this level just sent in very few zombies in general. And now, with us having used 70 fire powers in total and none of the other ones, our total power-ups used reached 679. Day 11 of Frostbite Caves is definitely like a turning point type of level in the run. And that's mainly due to the reason that it was the first level with 4 flags, which of course the difficulty doesn't go up, but the number of power-ups being used definitely does. And the first big wave ended up taking 3 power-ups in total to beat. By the second big wave, we'd used 5. By the third one, we'd used 7. And finally, in order to beat this entire day, we had to use 9 power-ups. Day 12 was the complete opposite because it only had 1 flag since it was a prepare your defenses level. And this entire day only took 6 power-ups in total to conquer. But day 13, we went back up to 4 flags again, and this time we had to protect these flowers in the back from being trampled on. And this level was the beginning of me realizing that the firepower isn't the perfect power and it has some things that it's not good at. And the main thing was that it couldn't kill a gargantuar within 1 firepower, and I actually ended up having to use 2 to take it down. Day 14 went down to 3 flags, which was still a lot, and it actually ended up taking 9 power-ups in total to beat this entire day. Day 15, once again, 4 flags, and we also had to protect these pepper pults from the zombies. And the protecting part was very easy, and it ended up taking 9 power-ups this level as well. Day 16, thankfully, went back down to 2 flags and was a conveyor level. And it felt nice torching the zombies on this level because I remember from the last video in the Spikeweed max level, this was actually one of the levels we lost to. Oh, and here's where I found out that the Zappy was better at killing Gargs because it took out this Garg with just 1 Zappy power. So now anytime a Garg came in, my main power to use was a Zappy, and then the fire power for cleanup. Day 17 had 2 flags, and it ended up taking 7 power-ups in total to beat this level. 18 once again was a conveyor with 2 flags, and once again took 7 power-ups. 19 again 2 flags with a bunch of frozen plants, and again 7 power-ups in total to beat the entire level. Day 20 however upped it a little bit again with 3 flags, but even though it was 3 flags, it still only took 7 power-ups to beat. And with that, we had beaten 10 more levels and added another 80 power-ups to our total count, making it 759 power-ups used. Day 21, another conveyor level with 2 flags. There's for some reason a lot of these. And the first big wave took a total of 4 fire powers to defeat, with the final one taking an additional 4, totaling to 8 power-ups used in this one level. Thankfully, day 22 was an easier level, still with 2 flags, but this time it only took 6 power-ups. 23, we went to 3 flags and had to defend these charred guards from the zombies. Mainly these snowstorms that the game would send in right on top of them. And I actually forgot to mention them last level because they're so easy, but the weasel hoarders were also introduced. And compared to the chickens and chicken wranglers, these guys were much easier to defeat because of the firepower. And this level only took 6 power-ups in total to defeat, even though it had 3 flags. Day 24 had 2 flags, and it was the first sun production level with 2500 sun needed. And this level was actually pretty annoying because the snowstorms kept on freezing unfreezing the sunflowers that I was placing down. And I didn't want to use my power-ups to unfreeze the flowers because that would just be a waste, and I had to keep on planting new sunflowers. But by the end, we'd reached the sun collection goal and had beaten the level using 7 power-ups in total. 25, another conveyor, again with only 2 flags, and it was completely annihilated with the use of only 6 power-ups. Day 26, we had once again gone up to 4 flags, but we averaged about 2 fire powers per flag and actually beat this level using only 8 power-ups, even though it was 4 big waves. Day 27 again was 4 flags, and we had to protect these 3 rutabagas. The first 2 big waves were beaten using just the fire power, at total being 7, but then the 3rd big wave brought in a gargantuar. So first I took down all the small ones with the fire power, and then I popped a zappy power to take care of the gargantuar. In getting close to the 4th and final wave, the game sent in a bunch of caveman ice pushers, so I took down basically all of them using the fire power, doing a little more cleanup with the 2nd fire power as the final wave was about to be sent in. And this final wave brought in 2 more gargantuars, so I targeted them first with a zappy and took them both out in 1 power, and then right after used a fire to take the rest of the zombies out. Day 28 is normally a prep your defenses level, so of course it only has 1 flag. And of course, mostly I was just using the fire power until a gargantuar was sent in, for who I used the zappy power. And then a 2nd gargantuar was sent in, so I used another zappy to kill it and some of the other weasel hoarders, and then quickly used a fire power to get rid of the rest of the zombies on the map. 29 thankfully calmed things down with 2 flags and no gargantuars, so we only used the fire power. But we actually still ended up using 11 power-ups in total. But here we were, the boss of the Frostbite Caves. And originally I thought the fire power wouldn't do that much damage because it kind of sucked against the gargantuars, so I tested both the fire and the zappy power against it, but it turned out that the fire power was miles better than the zappy one for the boss. And this actually ended up being much easier than the previous bosses, and it only took a total of 6 power-ups to beat it. And this brought our total count to 842. And sadly, this also means that we now have to vault the fire power, because next step is Day 1 of Lost City has 1 flag, and once again starts with me going back to the normal power-ups. And I used 1 zappy power alongside 4 snowballs to beat the entirety of Day 1. Day 2 has 2 flags and introduces the parachute zombie, who I accidentally took out because I was actually going for the normal ones and it happened to get in the way. And the first big wave was defeated within 3 powers, and to beat the final wave it took an additional 3, totaling to 6. Day 3 was pretty crazy because it was a conveyor, but we already had 3 flags to deal with. The big waves also had very heavy clumps of zombies, and I was using the snowball power to beat them. And thankfully I'd gotten good enough with the snowball power that I only needed 1 to take them down. And even the final wave, which brought in a lot more zombies than I was expecting, so I accidentally pre-fired the snowball power up, but somehow still ended up beating all the zombies with just 1. Day 4, there's a pre-placed walnut which I instantly shoveled, and the shovel zombie was also introduced, which I zapped, and then I tried to zap any other zombies that were coming in, having used 3 power-ups to beat the very first big wave, and then almost beating the final wave, only having used 2 more power-ups, but then I missed this 1 conehead who I had to use a zappy power to take out. Day 5 was another conveyor, again with 3 flags, and the first big wave took 3 powers, the second took 2 more, and the final wave also required 2, which made the total 7 power-ups used on this level. Day 6 was a non-conveyor level that also had 3 flags, and once again I almost got all the zombies of the final wave with 1 power, but then I missed 2 of the basic zombies, having to use a zappy on them, totaling to 8 power-ups used in this level. 7 was once again 3 flags, and we beat the first 2 big waves using 5 power-ups, by the end totaling to 7. Day 8 we went back down to 2 flags, but this time we had to protect these flowers in the middle from being trampled on. And as there weren't any enemies similar to the chickens of the Wild West in this challenge was pretty easy to do, and we also only had to use 6 power-ups in total to beat this level. Day 9, once again a conveyor level with 3 flags, and the first flag took a total of 3 power-ups to beat, the second took 2 more, and the final one took 3 more, which totaled to 8 power-ups used on this level. Day 10, again 3 flags and a normal level with no special challenges, and the parachute zombies were a little annoying due to similar causes to the pirate swinging zombies from Pirate Seas, and that's because they left a big gap between all the zombies that were being sent in, which made it harder to hit all the zombies under 1 power. But that aside, said, we'd beaten this level using 8 power-ups in total, which had now brought our total power-ups used to 915. Day 11, similarly to day 10, had 3 flags and no special challenges, and in total it took 7 power-ups to defeat. Day 12 had 3 flags and the special challenge of collecting 5,000 suns. But there was another big thing hidden within the level, and that was the introduction of the Gargantuar of Lost City, which got eviscerated as usual. And then there were 2 more sent within the final wave, and those 2 weren't a problem either. Day 13, we saw our 4th conveyor level with 3 flags, but there was actually a pretty annoying zombie that was introduced in this level, and that was the dragonflies, because first you have to beat the dragonfly, and then you can defeat the zombie that they were carrying, which in a way is annoying because sometimes I think I've defeated a zombie, but then I come to realize that it's still alive. But that aside, we beat the entirety of day 13 using 7 power-ups, which wasn't too bad. Day 14, again, 3 flags. Lost City definitely has a weird ratio of flags per level, with the average being 3. But even with 3 flags, we're once again able to beat the level using only 7 power-ups. Day 15 had 3 flags, and we had to protect these 2 Aki in the top and bottom lane. And this level was also beat using only 7 power-ups. There's a lot of weird patterns in Lost City, with most of the levels only having 3 flags, and also it only taking 7 power-ups on a lot of the levels. Day 16 was of course another conveyor level with 3 flags once again, and this level was actually a little different because it ended up taking 8 power-ups in total to beat this level because some of the imps got launched from the Gargantuars. Day 17, again 3 flags, and it started off with this imp carrying the tint and placing it on the gold tile, but then as soon as the next few zombies were sent in, I used a snowball power to take care of them and the tent. We have to take care of the tent carrying imps as fast as we can because otherwise they can become a big problem spawning in the zombies. So throughout this entire level, I was making sure that the imps couldn't get anywhere close to the gold tiles, and it ended up going pretty well as it only took 6 power-ups in total to beat the entirety of this level. Day 18 was a surprise because it was a conveyor level, but it only had 2 flags, and once again it only took 6 power-ups to beat the entirety of this level. Day 19 was 2 flags and started off with 2 imps that I zapped after they got halfway through the level, and then I was mostly just spamming the snowball power-up because there were some tanky zombies being sent. Same with the final wave because it brought in a clump of zombies and one snowball power was able to take them all out. Day 20 has 2 flags and the Z-shaped gold tile pattern, and I used a zap, 2 back-to-back snowball power-ups, then going back to a zappy for the weak imps that were being sent in, and then right before the final wave using a snowball power to take out all the zombies on the map. And lastly, the final wave itself was taken out using 1 snowball power-up, alongside 1 more zappy power for this imp that I missed, bringing the total to 982 power-ups used. Day 21 also had 2 flags, and normally it only gives you Sunbeam, Toadstool, and Stalia to work with, but thankfully because of the power-ups we don't have to depend on this atrocious lineup. And day 21 was beat using 7 power-ups, mainly being 5 snowballs and 2 zappies. Day 22 only had 1 flag, and it was beat using 6 power-ups. 23 we went back up to 3 flags, and it also brought in the annoying Indiana Jones zombies alongside some Gargantuars. And the Indiana Jones zombies are very annoying because while they're in the air swinging, they're very difficult to hit with the power-ups. So unless you're specifically targeting them, they're very difficult to hit. And because of this annoying combination of zombies, we had to use 9 power-ups to beat the entirety of this level. 24 went back down to 2 flags, and we had to protect these flowers in the back from being trampled on. And the first zombie was this umbrella that got eviscerated by a zappy alongside an Indiana Jones. And the first big wave had been beat using only 3 power-ups, adding an additional 3 more for the final big wave, totaling to 6 for this entire level. 25 again was only 2 flags, and it actually only took 5 power-ups to beat this level, which is a number we hadn't seen in a while. 26 again 2 flags with no special challenges, but this one on the other hand actually ended up taking 6 power-ups, which still wasn't bad. 27 we went back up to 3 flags, but no additional challenges, besides the fact that the turquoise skull zombie was introduced, but that's not a big threat either since we don't have any plants planted. And this level ended up taking 9 power-ups to beat, with 8 of them being snowballs and 1 zappy. 28 we went back down to 2 flags, and because of the annoying tents in the middle, I ended up missing 1 zombie with my snowball power, having to use a zappy power to take it out, totaling our power usage to 7 power-ups. Day 29 had 3 flags, and it took 7 power-ups to beat, with me somehow beating this entire final wave with just 1 snowball. Day 30 had 2 flags and 3 columns of mold colonies in the back, and the first big wave only took 3 powers to beat, and in total this level took 5 power-ups, which was pretty impressive. Day 31 was also only 2 flags, and somehow once again only only took 5 power-ups. It's weird that the final levels of the world are taking the least. But next up was the boss of Lost City, which completely debunked this theory of the final waves taking the least because this one took much more. It took 9 power-ups to reach the final health bar of the boss. Afterwards, taking another 4, totaling to 13. And we had now been well over 1,000 power-ups at 1,067 used. And we still had 6 more worlds to go, with the next one being Day 1 of Far Future started like any other with 1 flag, but this one actually took 7 power-ups to beat, which was a lot for a first day. Day 2 introduced these mechanical shield zombies, which were a little annoying because they actually tanked some shots from the snowballs. But on the final wave, I was able to defeat one before it got its shield up, but the second one did get its shield up, but I was still able to beat all the zombies with 1 power, totaling to another 7. Day 3 was 1 flag as well, and it introduced the annoying imp bots. And these were also very similar to the Pirate Sea's swing zombies because when they dropped in, they made a big gap between all the zombies, making it difficult to hit all of them with 1 power-up. Day 4 was a level that dropped sun bombs, and of course I can't use the sun bombs to deal any damage to the zombies, but this was also a level where I tried to break the habit of collecting sun. And I was doing pretty well not collecting the sun, but then I realized there was another problem, and that was the plant food that dropped, which I was also collecting even though I didn't need it at all. There's too many instinctual things that we collect in this game, which also included the coins that were dropping. But that aside, this level actually ended up taking 10 power-ups in total to beat, which was a lot for a level that only had 2 flags. Day 5, we went back down to 1 flag, using 1 zappy for this beginning zombie, and then 2 more zappies for the other basic zombies that were coming in, finally having to use a snowball for this Robocone mech zombie. But right after, we used 2 more zappy powers, but then as the final wave brought in 3 more Robocone mechs and a bucket head, I used a snowball power to take all of them out. Day 6 was 2 flags, and started with me using zappies for the normal zombies, but then as the numbers were increasing and the tankier zombies started coming in, I was using the snowballs. Once again, having to use 10 power-ups because I missed this 1 shield mech and the cone head, which I used a zappy for. Day 7 had 2 flags, and I started off with a zappy, and the first big wave ended up taking 5 power-ups in total, and then reaching/beating the final wave took 6 more power-ups, totaling to 11 for this level. Day 8 was a conveyor level, and once again had 2 flags, and it was a combination between zappies and snowball powers depending on what zombies were on the screen. And this level also brought in the Gargantuar of the Far Future, and this level ended up taking 12 power-ups in total to defeat. And the Far Future is taking a lot more power-ups than usual, mainly due to the reason that the zombies are being sent in a very spread out fashion. So I'm having to use power-ups for 2 to 3 zombies at a time, like when comparing to Frostbite Caves, which was sending in all the zombies basically at once. Day 9 also ended up taking 9 power-ups in total. Day 10 again only had 2 flags, which was also a big difference compared to the previous 2 worlds because they had many more flags even though they're supposed to be easier. Day 10 also introduced another annoying zombie of Far Future, which was the disco bot, and the disco bots can be annoying because they spawn in the jetpack disco zombies and they just become an extra nuisance for no reason. And the final wave of course sent in 2 disco bots, and we had to use a snowball power to beat all of them, now increasing our power up total to 1,155. Day 11 is normally a prep your defenses level, which made it only have 1 flag, but even with this 1 flag, we ended up using 10 power-ups on this 1 level. The Far Future was definitely starting to be the most draining of the power-ups, as day 12 with this measly 2 flags took another 12 power-ups to beat. Day 13 was also 2 flags, but this time thankfully it took only 9 power-ups to beat instead of the 12. Day 14 was 1 flag with the 1500 sun limit, and this one ended up taking 9 power-ups because I missed these 2 zombies at the end, which I had to use a zappy for. Day 15 had 2 flags and these citrons that I had to protect, and I couldn't really do anything about them killing these zombies instantly besides me just using the power-ups instantly as well. So if they ended up killing any zombies, I kind of just allowed it but tried my best to use my power-ups to not have this happen. And in doing so, I used 7 power-ups to beat day 15. Day 16 was a conveyor with 2 flags, in which I was mostly just using snowball powers for because the zombies had gotten much tankier than before. In the end, using 9 snowballs and 1 zappy, totaling to 10 power-ups. Day 17 only had 1 flag, and thankfully it only took 7 power-ups to defeat. Day 18 was a pretty crazy level because it has a 6,000 sun production goal, and due to this enormous goal, I also brought in all of my good sun producers. In the end, comfortably reaching the sun goal and using 9 power-ups to beat the level. Day 19 was 1 flag and another sun bomb level, and I tried to not collect the sun again, but ended up forgetting and collected 2 sun. And at that point, I'd given up on trying to break the habit of collecting sun. And this level had some pretty annoying tanky zombies such as the Disco Bot, Conehead Mech, and Gargantuars, which led to a hefty 11 power-ups used in total. Day 20 had 2 flags and 5 star fruits that we had to protect, and I couldn't really do much to try to prevent these guys from doing damage to the zombies, besides again just using the power-ups as fast as possible. And in doing so, I ended up using 12 power-ups in total. Day 21, we had to produce 5,000 sun in total, and then there was a 16 plant limit. But once again, as my sun producers were pretty good, this wasn't much of a problem. And by the halfway point, we'd reached the sun goal, and by the end, had used 11 power-ups to beat the zombies of this level, bringing our total to now 1,261. Day 22 was a prep your defenses level with 1 flag, and it should have taken 8 power-ups in total to beat, but I somehow missed these 2 zombies in the end, so I had to use a 9th zappy. Day 23 had a 15 plant limit and a 2250 sun limit with 2 flags, and the first big wave had been beaten using 5 power-ups, being a combination of zappies and snowballs, and beating the final wave had taken an additional 4, totaling to 9 power-ups used to beat day 23. Day 24 had 2 flags and started off with me using a zappy to beat the first 2 zombies, next using another zappy for this Conehead, and then another zappy for these other 2 zombies. And as the big wave sent in a football mech, I had to use the snowball power, and the same went for the very final wave, which also sent in 3 football mechs, but I somehow missed this one imp bot, which I first chose a zappy but then switched to a flick to get rid of it. And I actually almost messed up, but thankfully I was able to beat it. And now we'd finally reached the boss of the far future, and this guy took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, and finally 25 power-ups in total to defeat, which was a huge jump from the previous bosses, and I don't know why they made this one so tanky. And with that, our power-up total had now jumped to 1,314. And next up, the Dark Ages, although it only has 20 levels, which is less than every other world in the game, like Far Future, its levels soak up a lot of my power-ups, mainly due to the sheer amount of zombies that are sent within each level, and they also all get very tanky very quickly. Day 1 specifically took 10 power-ups. Day 2 only had 1 flag, but it already introduced bucket heads within the second night, and I was already having to use the snowball powers to take them down. But this level did have less zombies than night 1, so we actually only ended up using 8 power-ups in total. Night 3 again was only 1 flag, but it introduced the annoying feature of necromancy, where imps or other zombies would spawn from the gravestones that were on the map. And this is one of those things that heavily separates the zombies on the screen, and it makes it harder for me to hit all of them with 1 power-up. And the amount of zombies sent in this level were in between the first night and the second night, because the amount of power-ups it took was 9 this time. Night 4 was a conveyor level with 2 flags, and in order to defeat the first big wave, I'd already used 5 power-ups. And then an additional 5 had to be used to get rid of the final wave, as I missed a couple of cone heads that were coming in late, making the number a total of 10. Day 5 was a normal level with 2 flags, bringing in the Jester zombies, who don't really do anything against the power-ups, so they're not much of a big deal, and they just act as a basic zombie. That is the nicest thing about having the power-ups as my main damage source, because I don't have to worry about any of the annoying zombies such as the wizards or the octopus zombies that we see later on. There's actually only 1 zombie that I'd say that the power-ups are worse against than the plants are, but that zombie comes in another world, so I'll tell you about it then. And the final wave, I started off with the snowball power-up, not having enough duration just for this 1 bucket head, so I zapped it down. Day 6 is a prepare your defenses level, and right off the bat it sends in zombies and also a necromancy at the same time. And it doesn't really even matter if I break the gravestones down, because the level ends up spawning more in anyways. And the final wave of this level, even though it had a bunch of zombies and I didn't think I was going to get them all, I somehow managed to and beat the level with just 1 snowball power on the final wave. Night 7 had 2 flags, and it introduced the night zombies, which have a ton more health, and this level ended up taking 11 power-ups in total. Day 8 we went back down to 1 flag, and thankfully because of this reduction we only ended up using 8 power-ups, which would have seemed like a lot in the earlier worlds, but in these later worlds, 8 is actually a good number. Day 9 had 2 flags and introduced the speed and health potions, and this level ended up taking 10 power-ups in total. Night 10 had 2 flags and was a conveyor level, and within the final wave introduced the Gargantuars of the Dark Ages, which like usual were completely decimated by the snowball power-up. And this level took 13 power-ups, bringing the total to 1411. Night 11 had 2 flags and was our introduction to the wizard zombie, who also, like the jester, did nothing. But even so, Night 11 ended up taking 12 power-ups to beat. Night 12 has 2 flags, and we have to protect these puff shroom in the back by constantly plant fooding them. And my main goal in this level was trying to plant food the puff shroom when no zombies were in range, and then trying to beat the zombies before they actually got in range, so that there wasn't any interference with the power-ups used. And the final wave just brought in a bunch of tanky zombies, and they were all pretty easily beat with 1 snowball power. Night 13 was a conveyor with 2 flags and ended up taking 10 power-ups to beat. Night 14 was probably my least favorite level of the entire challenge, and that was due to the reason that we had a 5,000 sun goal, but the level didn't allow me to bring in any sun shroom or any sun producers besides the sunbeam, maybe the worst sun producer in the game. So our only options to meet that 5,000 sun goal were either using the sunbeam or wasting our power-ups on the gravestones and collecting sun from there. And honestly, I thought because of this, I would have to use way too many power-ups to beat this level, but somehow I'd only used 9 power-ups in total and had met that 5,000 sun goal pretty easily. Night 15 was a prep your defenses level, so of course they only had 1 flag, but a ton of zombies being sent at once, so the snowball was the go-to power-up this time. And even though the groups of zombies were very big, there weren't too many mini waves of zombies, and this allowed me to beat the level by only using 8 power-ups. Night 16 had 2 flags and also introduced the king zombies, who can be annoying if they get the night helmets off on the zombies, but we somehow also beat this level only using 8 power-ups. Night 17, however, was a little different with 2 flags, but all the zombies being sent in were very spread out, so I actually ended up using 11 power-ups to beat Night 17. Night 18 was also very similar to Night 17, as by the end I'd again used 11 power-ups. Night 19, like the others, had 2 flags, but this time we also had to protect these magnet shrooms that were very upfront, and since we couldn't plant any plants to defend these magnet shrooms like the walnut, I had to make sure that I was getting rid of the zombies very fast. And also with the inclusion of these Gargantuars, we ended up using 10 power-ups on Night 19. But now we're on the boss of the Dark Ages, who within 3 power-ups we'd gotten it down to 2/3 of his health. And then with 5 more power-ups, we got it down to 1/3. And then with an additional 4, we got it down to 0 health. And the boss had been beat using 12 power-ups, making our overall total power-ups used 1,514. And this number was around the number I'd predicted before starting this challenge. But we still have 4 more worlds to go, with the next one being Day 1 of Neon Mixtape Tour seemed like it was being nicer to us than Dark Ages had been, as it only took 6 power-ups to beat this first level. Day 2 already brought forth a second flag, but surprisingly, this level also only took 6 power-ups to beat. Day 3, however, was a conveyor with now already 3 flags. But surprisingly, even with the addition of this 3rd flag, we only used 1 more power-up, making it 7. Day 4 also had 3 flags, and we used 3 power-ups to beat the first big wave. The second big wave was beaten with an additional 2, and then 2 more for the final wave, totaling it to again 7. We're having a pretty good start to the Neon Mixtape Tour, with Day 5 also only taking 7 power-ups. Day 6 we went back down to 2 flags and a conveyor level, and even this level only took 6. Day 7 again 2 flags, once again only taking 7 power-ups. Day 8 went back up to 3 flags, but this time there was a massive wave sent in the final flag. and in total we had to use 9 power-ups to beat this level. Day 9 was a pretty interesting one because we had to reach the goal of producing 2,000 sun, but we couldn't bring in any sunflowers and had to depend on the flowers that they already gave us. And by the second flag, I'd met this goal pretty easily, taking down the final wave using 2 snowball powers as I'd missed a couple of zombies with that first snowball. Day 10 had 2 flags and was a conveyor level, and again only taking 7 power-ups to beat the entirety of day 10. Day 11, 2 flags and 6 power-ups. Same with day 12. Day 13, however, was much different. It was a prepare your defenses level, but for the first time, it actually had 2 flags instead of 1. And beating the first flag took 5 power-ups in total, and then beating the rest of the level took 6 more, adding to a total of 11 power-ups. Day 14 had 2 flags as well, but thankfully we'd gone back down to needing 7 power-ups again. Day 15, we had to protect these 5 FAPI within 2 flags, and in doing so, we ended up using 10 power-ups in total. And this brought the overall total to 1,625 power-ups used. Day 16 was a conveyor with 3 flags, and I started off by using a Zappy, but as later a Gargantuar of the Neon Mixtape Tour showed up, I used a snowball power to take it out, and another snowball power for the second Gargantuar that showed up a couple of seconds later, and it felt like I was using a lot of power-ups, but by the end, I'd only used 5 snowballs and 1 Zappy, totaling to only 6 power-ups used. Day 17 also only took 7 power-ups. Day 18 also only took 7 power-ups, 19 as well, and 20. Day 21 surprisingly was even less with only 5 power-ups used. Day 22 was definitely a different one because this time it actually took 9 power-ups in total to beat it, and 8 of them were snowballs and 1 was a Zappy. Day 23 was also a little more, taking 8 power-ups in total, and mainly this increase in number of power-ups was due to the fact that the arcade pushers were introduced, because the arcade machines can spawn zombies as well. Day 24 was a prepare your defenses level, but this time it actually had 3 flags, and we averaged about 3 power-ups for every flag, as we beat this level with 9 power-ups used in total. 25 went back down to 1 flag, but even with 1 flag, this level still ended up taking 8 power-ups to beat. Day 26, we have to protect these spore shrooms, and to start off, we let these mohawks push them back until they can't anymore, and this just gives us more space to work with. And by the end, we only had to use 7 power-ups to defend these guys. Day 27 had 2 flags and was a conveyor level, and only took 6 power-ups to beat. 28 took 8 power-ups, 29 took 6 power-ups. Day 30 actually took much more at a whopping 10 power-ups, but thankfully, day 31 only having 2 flags took 6 power-ups, which were all snowball. And now here we were, the boss of the Neon Mixtape Tour. And even though it had 5 full bars of health, thankfully, its tankiness was a lot less than some of the previous bosses, and it only took 10 power-ups, all snowball, to take down the Neon Mixtape Tour Zomboss. And this brought our total to 1,751 power-ups used so far. But we still have 3 more worlds left, with the next one being... And now, as we've reached what I would call the end game, and we all probably understand how the power-ups are being used, I'm only going to be showing you the important / difficult levels that I had to deal with in the Jurassic Marsh, Big Wave Beach, and Modern Day. Mainly just skipping over the semi-repetitive levels. But of course, I'll still be mentioning the power-up total used in those levels at the end of each world. Day 7 of the Jurassic Marsh was a semi-difficult one where we had to protect these flowers from being trampled on by the zombies. Normally, you would just place the primal walnuts directly on top of the flowers and the zombies basically wouldn't be able to do anything. But of course, since we can't plant any plants, I have to make sure that I'm taking care of the zombies before they get too close or they get too close to the dinosaurs about to push them forwards. And with some snowball spam, I was safely able to beat this level on my very first attempt. Day 16 introduced the Gargantuar of the Jurassic Marsh, and this Gargantuar was instantly defeated by the snowballs as usual. This Gargantuar even got kicked forward right after it was taken out. Day 18 is where I would say the entire strategy within the Jurassic Marsh was shifted, and that's because the T-Rex dinosaur was introduced. And the T-Rex, if given the right opportunity, makes the zombies super speedy. And normally it can be countered if a plant is planted right in front of the zombie, but we can't plant, so we just have to make sure that we take care of the zombies with the power-ups fast enough. And the T-Rex made day 19 of Jurassic Marsh one of the scariest levels in this entire challenge. And that's due to the reason that we couldn't let the flowers get trampled on, but there was also the T-Rex super speeding the zombies. So I had to constantly make sure that I had a snowball power equipped and take care of the zombies if they ever got in front of the T-Rex. And thankfully, I was able to do so on the first attempt. Day 20, although it did have the T-Rex, was cheesed just a little bit because it was also a sun production level, so I technically did have plants planted to body block any of the zombies that got super speeded. Day 23, an imp in the top lane got very close to a lawnmower because it was super speeded and I barely caught it with my snowball. Day 25 introduced another annoying dinosaur, which was the Ankylosaurus, who knocked forward the the zombies very far. And normally it knocks the zombies forward to the closest plant, but since we don't have any plants planted, the zombies end up getting knocked to the third to last column. And this can be very dangerous if I'm not paying attention. And like in some of the previous worlds, this is also annoying because it spreads out the zombies and makes it harder for me to hit all of them within one power up. But honestly, that was all of the semi-difficult slash abnormal levels within the Jurassic Marsh. So now we're on the boss, who ended up taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and finally 12 snowballs to take it down all the way, bringing our complete total to 1,987 power-ups used. We're nearing the 2,000 mark, and we've almost also used 1,000 snowball power-ups. But aside from that, next step is Big Wave Beach isn't really a challenge at all, and it's mostly just long and boring gameplay. The only levels I'd argue that are challenging are the ones that have the endangered plants, but also the fishermen that are able to hook them into the water. And the first one of these levels is of course day 23, in which we have to protect these banana launchers, but of course in my rules I can't use the banana launchers to do damage, so I have to make sure that I use a power up and take out the fishermen as soon as possible. And this can get a little confusing when there's a bunch of zombies on the screen, but if I just use a snowball, it also slows down the fishermen, which ends up being a big help, and we're able to beat day 23 pretty easily. And of course, the only other level that has endangered plants and fishermen is this level, day 30. And this is honestly just an evil level, because if the fishermen even touch the guacodiles, they end up dying instantly. And on the third flag, the game sent in a fisherman in every lane, which got very scary, so I had to slow down and use a snowball power up just so I wouldn't lose. And that was probably the closest I've been to losing in this entire challenge. Even though this challenge has nothing to do with winning or losing, it still can be detrimental because we have to restart the level and we'd end up using more power ups. So of course I want to try to beat the levels on my very first try. But other than that one little scare, the rest of day 30 wasn't too difficult. And now we're on the boss of Big Wave Beach. And the first third of its health was taken down using 5 power ups. And the second third took an additional 10 power ups. And then the final third took another 10 power ups, totaling to 25 just for this boss. But the overall total had now reached 2,322, but we still have to cover. And modern day didn't really have any difficult levels, but more so they were interesting. Like for example, there were 4 of these levels that we have to skip because the power-ups don't end up helping us and aren't really needed to beat this level. Or more so, we can't beat the level with just the power-ups. The only difficult level I would say is day 30, where we have to protect these flowers from being trampled on, and there's a bunch of tanky and fast zombies that could easily beat us. But I was making sure to always have a snowball power ready for any of the speedy zombies that were to come in. And doing this, we actually beat day 30 without a problem. But now we had the most interesting part of the modern day, which was the 3 boss fights that are in this world. And this was the first of 3, which ended up taking 13 power-ups to defeat. The second boss fight, we got pretty unlucky since it is RNG which boss fights we get, and it ended up being one of the more tanky ones. But this time, instead of taking the 25 it did last time, it only took 16 power-ups to beat. And here we were, the final boss fight of the entire challenge, and we got pretty lucky that it was the mammoth fight in the Frostbite Caves, because this is actually the easiest boss we can get. And in the end, it only took 5 fire powers and 1 zappy to take this boss down. And as this finishes up in the background, let's see how we truly did and how many power-ups we ended up using in total. Drumroll. In total, we used 2,566 power-ups, which is honestly insane, which averages to about 8 power-ups per level. But now let's figure out how much the total cost in coins would be. So out of these 2,566, 1,382 were snowballs, 13 were flicks, 941 were zappies, and 230 were the fire powers. And the total cost comes out to 2,630,450 coins, which is honestly crazy to think about. But there you have it. That's how many power-ups and how much it would cost to beat the entirety of PvZ2 with just power-ups. Let me know in the comments if there's any other ideas I should try out. Okay, bye-bye.